All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know we have people joining from everywhere. We're in California, so it's evening time. We have a jam-packed evening, so I am going to be getting started and we're going to move quickly. But I am recording, so anyone who has signed up, if you join late or need to leave early, you'll definitely be getting a recording. So, yeah. Well, I'll jump right in. So welcome to our webinar. I am Irene Lee. I am the Center Director of the Stowell Learning Center, and we are so honored to be hosting this webinar with the Amen Clinic as our special guests. They are world-renowned, and we are so privileged to not only have had a long-term partnership with the Amen Clinic, but also be able to collaborate and do this event together. So this event is all about setting your student up for success. So we are joined by the Amen Clinic. First, we'll have Dr. Jay Faber, and then later we'll have Dr. Jay Gattis joining as well. The other two participants, we have Megan from the Stowell Learning Center and Sarah from the Amen Clinic. They are part of our outreach team, and they will be helping facilitate and fielding any questions or the chat. So please, throughout the presentation, feel free to be entering your questions either in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be sure to take a look throughout the evening. There's Dr. Gattis. All right, so yes, school has started, the honeymoon's over, your child may be struggling, now what should we do? We're gonna talk about many different ways to find out what's really going on with your child. What does ADHD look like? What does dyslexia look like in the brain, and what can actually be done about it? So we're gonna jump right in with Dr. Jay Faber from the Amen Clinic. He's gonna be talking mostly about the process of getting diagnosed, SPECT functional neural imaging, and conditions like ADD, ADHD. Dr. Jay Faber is a double board certified psychiatrist in both adults as well as children and adolescents psychiatry. He has expanded his clinical training such that there is a better understanding of the brain and body connection, and he is board certified in metabolic medicine from this institution. Dr. Faber treats hormonal, inflammatory, toxic, dietary, and metabolic problems to help the brain function at its best level. And he has integrated a more holistic approach to help improve things like focus, mood, decision-making, memory, all those things that we really want to get better. So thank you so much, Dr. Jay Faber, for joining us today. Go ahead and take over.
Well, thank you for having me. Happy, I guess, Thursday. I'm assuming it's Thursday for everyone else. We don't have any foreign people on, do we, from Europe or anywhere? Probably not. And if you do, God bless you for getting up, I guess, early for your time. Okay, so so I'm Dr. Jay Faber. I work at the Amen Clinic. I've been there for about 12 years now, and my training has expanded dramatically from here. But it really gets down to just helping. I think in your guys' situation, parents, how do we help your kids do their best, in school? And I hear all sorts of things. People will come in and say, listen, my doctor wanted to start a stimulant. I'm not sure if that's where I wanted to go. We heard about you guys and you look at the brain. So we'll look at the brain. I'll show you a couple pictures. I can't go into everything. We've get patients, they do really well until middle school. Then all of a sudden grades plummet, which by the way is a good time that people start having mood issues. And so we'll start talking to people there. And then there's sometimes our high schoolers, they meet new friends in high school they shouldn't, and grades can go down too. And so why is all this important is because each person is an individual. One, two, that people come in at different times, and three, our brains are all different. I mean, you think about it, it's like all the DNA in the world, there's no one's like yours, there's no one like mine, there's no one's like your kids. And so wouldn't it make sense to take a more individualized approach to help your child knock it out of the park at school, whatever the knock out of the park it is for them? So, with that, we do something called SPECT scans. It's kind of a big fancy word, but basically what we do is we look at blood flow to the brain, and we look at where the brain's getting too much or too little blood flow. And from doing this for a number of years, we've kind of figured out what symptoms are associated with that. So, people ask how many, and it's like done over like 210,000 scans, which, might not seem like a lot to some, but I can remember literally 2011 when I was here, we had done like something like 20,000 scans. Right. So neuroimaging is becoming bigger, and Dr. Gattis and some of the cool stuff he's doing with QEEGs will kind of tell you his story as well. Over 14,000 published articles. That might not seem big, but neuroimaging is growing. I'm gonna tell you, these numbers are gonna exponentially get higher. We're going to be learning so much more about the brain because we can, guess what, look at it now non-invasively and see what is going on at a much deeper level, and then treat things, not necessarily always with a medication, which is good news. So, this is one of Dr. Amon's patients. This is Jarrett, and he had come in to see him, and he was hyperactive, impulsive. Some of this probably sounds familiar. No friends, tempers, learning problems, and he'd been to look at this, 5 doctors and 5 stimulant medications, 5 different meds. Anyone getting better? And if anything, things were getting even more challenging because he was having rages and more mood swings. So now maybe some parents, you've had this already. You've got a kid, you go see the doctor, you hope things and pray things get better. And instead, they actually get more problematic. And so with that, it's a very anxiety provoking time for most parents. In general, the kids might not care, but the parents are going, what's going to happen to my child? Health, it's an adventure, right? But it's not a very fun adventure. It's not like you're, going to camping, right, with your family, and somebody has a sore leg, so you're not going to go hiking. You'll sit by the campfire. I mean, if your kids got a bad grade, you put on a medication and they're not doing well, it is not a fun adventure. And so one of the things we try to do is we look at brain and see what's going on. Now, how do we look at the brain? And I'm giving you a brief, quick synopsis. We look at the surface of our brain. Okay. And then we look below surface of the brain. I just thought of something. I'm going to get up for literally 5 seconds. I can make this even more conceptually easier to understand. So bear with me. Just thought of this idea now.
And just as a reminder, please go ahead and put your questions
All
in
right,
the
so
chat.
this is my 3D brain. If your kids were on, I would be saying this is a plastic brain. Sometimes kids think it's a real brain. And I go, this is the surface. And then I go, here's the underneath. Here's our subcortex. All right, so the picture on the right-hand side of the screen, that's looking below surface of the brain. And we look at both, and we can look at blood flow and start to tell a whole lot. Now, typically we like the surface to be really smooth. Colors on the surface can mean nothing. We're looking at texture. And then the picture on the right, the colors do mean something. And blue, our blood flows at the 50th percentile. Red, our blood flows a little bit faster. It's at the 85th percentile, and then white, our blood flows really cruising. It's at the 92nd percentile. Ideally, we like colors to pretty much match up like this. There's different regions, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go through here. So at any rate, so Jared's brain, okay, this is what we expect to see. And then look at Jared's brain underneath. Okay, a lot of red and white. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details but what this means, but I'm going to tell you a few things here as well. One, people who get a lot of red up here tend to daydream. So we always think of focusing like you get distracted. More of our kids, like with frontal lobe problems underneath, these are the kids that do well on stimulants. But here, kids, rather than get distracted, they tend to daydream. They'll focus, but on the wrong thing. Here, our basal ganglia, people who get extra blood flow here get more anxious. And then here, this is our internal temporal lobes. People get a lot of blood flow here. This should all be blue. And when it's not, people tend to get really irritated. Now, when you put a kid on stimulants with a brain like this, guess what we do? We stimulate here, 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 and here. And guess what happens? The kids will have a higher propensity to daydream. They'll have a higher propensity to get more anxious, and they'll have a higher propensity to get more angry. And so what we thought was going to be a great treatment with stimulants turns out not to be. And we see this a lot at the clinic. So Jared went on not medication. He didn't go on medications. He went on supplements, and we could talk about that maybe another time. And now Jared 10 years later, he's on, guess what? Natural supplements, no meds, behavior's a whole lot better, no anger. He wants to be a firefighter. He's on the honor roll. I mean, this is the kind of crazy stuff we see. And it's not crazy because there's a lot of brains, they just need some help. The other thing I'd say, and you watch this, is I'd say probably 85% of my kids are on just on supplements. And it's almost becoming like going to the gym. You go to the gym, and if you're going to work out, you get your protein powders, you get your creatinine. Now we're finding out the brain likes supplements. So you can use, rather than creatinine, there's GABA or magnesium. I'm not going to go to what they all mean, saffron, but we use natural ingredients and we get this brain here kind of calm down. So Jared is good. And I think this is a good story. Some stories we have may not start as good, but, statistically at our clinic, we're seeing, and we see the people that aren't getting better, 75 to 80% after 6 months are doing really well. Basically, we look at ADD. There's 7 different types. We're not going to talk about all of them now, but I'll just talk about a couple, and then we're going to start leaving some things open for questions. Just FYI kinds of things. Kids on our surface, just looking at our brain from the bottom up, the region here, which equals this region, here's our lower frontal cortex. All right, we like this to be really smooth. This is kind of how we like to see it. If we get bumps like this one here, kids start to get distracted. If they got bumps here, guess what? This is where Ritalin and other stimulants like Adderall, this is where they help. All right, which is good news. If that's the only problem, you're solved. Now, the problem is there's 7 types of attention. Okay, and I think we'll probably discover more even as time goes on. And so some kids don't have that. So what happens next is I'm just going to show you 2 different types of something we see a lot at the office and what we kind of do. And then I'll leave it quiet after that. So one of the 7 types is called the anxious ADD. These kids, here's what's normal, have really big red blood flow in this area called their basal ganglia. These kids get more nervous. They get more anxious. They don't sit still. They bite their nails. Okay. They tend to pick at their hair. When they get to high school, they find things they shouldn't use to calm these down. Okay. Things like alcohol, in this state, California, pot, and sometimes pain pills. So it's sort of like a risk factor, letting parents know, hey, your kid may be 8, but please watch his friends when he gets into high school. Okay, because you could be the most loving, caring parents, which I'm sure most of you all out there are. But if you get with the wrong people, that's a problem. All right. These kids also procrastinate a lot. All right. Now, when we see this kind of pattern, medically, we used to give a lot of medications like Ativan, Xanax, Valium, okay, all of which are addictive. All right. Who wants to give their 8-year-old 3rd grader Xanax to bring to school, right? Not so cool. It's addictive. Plus, it's toxic. It causes your surface to get more bumps as well. So, what do we do? Well, here's what we know. Ativan, Xanax bind to where? They bind to the GABA receptors in our basal ganglia. We find if you just use a supplement like GABA, helps calm these areas down. It's not addictive, and it's not toxic. Okay, so these hyperactive kids will start to be able to sit still, be able to listen in the classroom setting as well. So if we use the stimulant, just like we saw in Jared, people would tend to get more anxious here. All right, so that's one type. And then the other type we see a ton, and we just kind of briefly hit on it here a second, and maybe come back and we can talk about all the 7 types here. But the other big one, just like Jared, okay, the ring of fire. Okay, the ring of fire type means if we start at the periphery of our cortex, go all the way around, it's all red. Okay, when we see this pattern, we get a little bit more concerned about something inflammatory going on. Could be a lot of different things, but usually in kids, it's food. Okay, and probably the biggest culprits are gluten and sugar, but there's other things too, like eggs, and there's corn, there's soy, dairy. There's kind of a way we kind of walk through, but we usually try to get the kids away from the sugar and we get away from the soy. A lot of times I'll ask parents when I see all this red and white, how's your kid when he tries to study? Okay. And what they tell us is they have a hard time getting things done. And so we kind of walk through, but this is what we see with these types of brains. Okay. Up here, kids tend to, from what I said earlier, we daydream. We also kind of get stuck on things. So you sit down to study and we either daydream or we get stuck. We don't even know where to begin. Then our basal ganglia, we tend to get more anxious and nervous. And with that, down here, we get really ticked off and irritable. When we see this pattern, guess what happens? The kids just want to quit. Okay. They also get tired and they get worn out and they want to do something else besides their homework. And guess who's the recipient of all the stress trying to keep their kids on track with their homework? Okay. Mom and dad. All right. Now, I won't go into all the areas, but what we like to do is use stimulants up here. This is called our anterior cingulate, as we just mentioned, stimulants for our basal ganglia. And then we use stimulants for our temporal lobes, where the kids tend to get more irritable. I'll give you one example, and I'll tell you how contemporary some of this is getting. Our temporal lobes, one of the supplements we really like to use is called taurine. Taurine's a natural inhibitory neurotransmitter. All of our brains make this. It's the second most abundant amino acid in our brain. All right. Guess where we find taurine these days? Go to 7-Eleven, AM, PMs, go to the soft drink section, Red Bull, Rock Stars, and Monsters. They all put taurine in them. All right. Now, why do they put taurine? Okay. These drinks, and by the way, I'm not telling your kids to drink taurine or drink they can drink taurine. They just can't drink the energy drinks. But all these drinks have a 250 milligram jolt, if not higher, of caffeine, 2.5 times more than you're supposed to have per day. So guess what happens? People are like this. To calm you all down, these drinks put the taurine in there. All right. All right. So Rockstar, when they first came out back 20 years ago out here in California, you couldn't find them. Everyone's going crazy buying the Rockstars. Red Bull got freaked out. Why aren't people drinking our beverages? And now theirs all have taurine. Now, my point is this, it's not to go get the energy drinks, but this is how well these supplements work. And the soft drink companies are making a good chunk of change because of it. You can go and get taurine at, say, Whole Foods or the vitamin shop for about $11 for a month's worth. Calms these down. If your kid's frustrated, irritable, we want to use this to calm this down. Okay. But there's things we can do to help get all this calmed down. And kids like Jared, you see what happens. They go from being rageaholics, anger monsters, to wanting to be firemen and being on the dean's roll. Okay. Now I could go and talk a whole lot more about different things, but my time's really up. And I think we'll just leave this for questions. My goal here was just to wet your whistle and say, hey, you know what? If you're a parent out there and your kid's not gotten better on their treatments, if you're a parent out there that says, hey, I want to just understand what's going on with my brain, my kid's brain, or if you're a parent who sees a transition from middle school to high school or grade school into middle school, you might consider looking at some of these more novel techniques to get a better understanding of how your son or daughter's brain's working, and then take the necessary steps to help calm some of these areas down. So at that, I think my time's about up. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll let our wonderful Dr. Gattis, if he's next, I hope. You guys will have to let me know if I made a mistake there. I'll have to take my ADD meds, supplements if I take any as well. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faber. Let's check the chat for any questions first. Let me see. Sorry, I'm boggling. There's a question here, Dr. Faber. Is there a recommended dosage for these supplements like GABA and taurine? Are they safe for younger children, such as preschool age?
We've used them in preschool age. I normally, like say with GABA, I probably don't go over 500 milligrams twice a day. But that said, you probably want to work with somebody at least initially to make sure the dosages are within what you'd want to have, especially the younger ones.
Thank you. And then we have two other instances. I have a 17-year-old foster daughter. What can be done if she was over medicated for 8 years?
And this happens a lot with foster kids. I mean, it's really crazy the number of pills they get on. One, I would get with a doctor who understands brain functioning at a much deeper level. Okay, what does that mean? It means they know the neuroanatomic areas and what might be overactive or underactive. If you want to come see us and get a scan, that would be one way helpful. Dr. Gattis does these really cool things called QEEGs, which can be really helpful. But you want somebody who's got a much more detailed understanding of what's going on in different neuroanatomic regions of the brain, such that one, you could look at getting off meds and look at other treatments that are safer to do it. You don't necessarily have to stop all the medications at once, but I think the goal is, I mean, if someone's on 6 or 7 psychotropics, that's insane. I mean, it's really crazy and all the interactions and side effects. If we could get down to one, maybe 2 medications and use some other techniques, I think it would be advisable that you want to get somebody who can sit down with you and kind of explain and walk you through what would be the most logical steps to take.
Mhm. About my 13-year-old is on generic Focalin and Prozac and started to self-harm. How do I know if supplements are appropriate?
Okay, so there is one is you'd have to try, but I will say this, and this is new stuff out of the press. So Prozac, some of our SSRIs, we're finding that, you know, a lot of people, we used to think they've got bipolar disorder. That's like if you get overactive and you get more irritable, which may be the case, but we're finding out a more likely probable cause is your child's liver, which breaks down medications. The enzymes called cytochrome P450 enzymes, they might not be working so well. And so the SSRIs build up like Prozac. And what happens is people get more irritable, frustrated. So what would you do? One thing, I would probably stop the med. I would also probably get a genetics test, you know, from GeneSight or Tempus, where you can actually see if your child is somebody who's breaking down medications too slowly or in some cases too quickly. So you can start to more personalize what would make more sense to help those areas.
This next one, I think Dr. Geis would also answer a little bit later, but for both of you, what is the age that you can do a brain scan? Again, I have a preschool age child. Is that appropriate?
We usually start at age 5 and work our way up. The radionuclide we use is called technetium, and the amount we give is the same as getting about a third of a CAT scan. All right, so it's not a lot, but it's some. Side effects, sometimes we'll see people get a rash, but I'll be honest, in my 12 years, this is all anecdotal because it's just from my observations. I've seen like maybe one case. For the most part, it's safe. I mean, kids might get a little bit more scared getting it, you know, because you have to put a needle in. Often we'll use a little numbing cream, and that takes away the pain and helps.
Mhm. When a child not only has ADHD, but also diagnosed with depression and bipolar, can the clinic deal with those issues too?
Yes, we can. And we see that a lot. And those are whole depression's a whole nother set of slides here to talk about. Bipolar, we see different patterns, but I'll be honest with you. Especially as the kids and young adults get, you know, into those age range, there's a lot of times something inflammatory going on. And that's a
Mhm.
whole nother topic, and treatments to help.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Faber. That was super informative. We are seeing the same things, and I'm sure our attendees are getting a lot of great information. Again, I think some of the responses Dr. Gattis will kind of correlate to the questions that have already been asked, but please continue to enter your questions in the chat below. If we don't get to your questions, we'll make sure to save them and email answers or responses out. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Faber. Thank you for attending and giving that great presentation. It was super informative. But yes,
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We are now going to move on to Dr. Gattis, also with the Amen Clinic. He's going to mostly be presenting on neurofeedback and learning. Dr. Gattis is a licensed clinical psychologist who is also board certified in neurofeedback, HRV biofeedback, and certified quantitative EEG or QEEG, is a certified QEEG diplomat. Dr. Gattis was originally trained in biofeedback and neurofeedback, and he went on to further training in neurofeedback and QEEG with many notable individuals within the field. Thank you so much, Dr. Gattis, for joining us this evening. Please go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to get to present with Dr. Faber, my colleague, and it's fun to have both the Dr. J's on your webinar. Let me share my slides. Okay. All right. Get some things out of the way. Okay. So, thinking about how to optimize our kids' performance, their, as Dr. Raymond likes to say, mental health is brain health, right? So how do we have the healthiest brain that we can have, so that we can do the best that we can do? So I'm going to talk to you about some foundations, and then we're going to talk about some of the imaging and the things we do when those aren't enough, right? So sleep, nutrition, activity, purpose, all important foundations for our optimal performance and our brain health. So in case you maybe haven't seen this kind of information before, these are the recommended guidelines for how much sleep to get every night. And we know that kids, broadly are not getting enough sleep at night, thanks to all these devices that they're so enticing and giving them a lot of great, not great blue light, keeping them awake. And in fact, we had some markers in the QEEG that used to be very specific for ADHD. And because everyone is so sleep deprived, those things are no longer specific, because everyone's brains, or a lot of kids' brains, look so sleepy. And that goes along with the frontal lobe underfunction, which looks a lot like ADHD on a QEEG. So I encourage people to, be aware of what good sleep hygiene is, getting off your devices an hour before bed. Make sure you're in the complete darkness when you're sleeping, because light disrupts your sleep. Maybe using white noise if there's noise in the house that might interrupt kids' sleep. Making sure that kids go to bed at a consistent time. And kids, we do know that you get better deep sleep if you go to bed early. Earlier in the night, before midnight, you get more deep sleep, which is very important for your brain's recovery from making a lot of effort, so that you feel like you're ready to go the next day. And then a simple technique for getting to bed, if a person has a hard time winding down and really getting to sleep, I talk to them about just when in your breathing, lengthening your exhale is a very simple technique that begins to slow down the heart rate and therefore calm your body. And it's just the simplest thing you can do, but often we don't know that would help us. So when you breathe in, then just breathing out and making that as long as you can, that breathing out, and you will get progressively sleepier. Now, the things that we're often looking at the Amen Clinic and finding as being kind of sneaky culprits behind a lot of behavior problems are sleep problems like sleep apnea, which often is overlooked in children because we think of sleep apnea as being associated with being older and overweight and those kinds of things. But children can have sleep apnea. And the key, symptom to look for is that they're sleepy all day or during the day. If they can fall asleep anytime during the day, at the drop of a hat, when they don't have, a lot of stimulation, that can be a sign that they're not getting good sleep and something is disrupting their sleep. And that could be, like I said, sleep apnea, which has, a couple of kinds. You got central apnea, which is just the brain failing to tell you to breathe during the night. And obstructive apnea, which means that there's, various things that can go wrong. That means it stops you from being able to bring in air. Sometimes I'll recommend that parents buy an overnight blood oxygen monitor and then look, are there dips in their blood oxygen over the night? Because that can be an indicator, a strong indicator that there's something up. Because that's really concerning. If your blood oxygen drops during the night, that means you're suffocating in essence, to some degree, which is really bad for your brain. And in particular, your hippocampus is very sensitive to drops in blood oxygen. So your memory will suffer if you stop breathing at that and don't take in enough oxygen. Also, there's periodic limb movement disorder. So that's where you kick at night. And, whenever I ask my, do you ever kick yourself awake? Do you wake up in the morning and the covers are everywhere and your pillow's somewhere else and you're turned around 180 degrees on the bed? That's a sign that you're really moving around, and that disrupts your sleep cycles. So the screener for that is to put a motion sensor on your ankle and see what it says in the morning. Like, is it going crazy? Like, I was moving all over the place all night. But of course, a sleep study, in the lab, sleep study is the definitive way to diagnose these things. I'm just talking about things you could do to kind of check and see, check on the sleep. And then the QEEG, which is the kind of neuroimaging that I'm a specialist in, will tip me off to sleep disorders, because we do some eyes closed recording with the QEEG, and then we also do an eyes open recording. And during the eyes closed recording, if you are sleep deprived because of a sleep disorder, you will just crash into sleep. Right? Your brain will show me that it's like going to sleep on you. And sometimes you'll actually see, the head nod or whatever. But if you go right to sleep with the eyes closed study, then I know there's something wrong with the sleep. All right, moving on from sleep. Nutrition. Dr. Faber was already talking about this. Of course, inflammation being a key piece with why we want to have our nutrition in order, because inflammation impairs your brain performance. I always talk to people about making sure they're getting their omega-3s, your fish oil. Not a lot of people get a lot of fish in their diet. If you do, that's great, but you're a little bit more the exception than the rule. We have a great little blood spot test, just a little prick and a little bit of blood, and they can send it off and look at your omega-3 to 6 ratio, which is a good way to kind of assess, am I getting enough omega-3s? Then you can supplement or change the diet and see, do you get in the right range on a subsequent test. And then a really great tip, and this has been so helpful for me and my kids, is that they have these omega-3 puddings that you can give to kids, and they're very palatable. There's a key lime pie flavor, and it has no sugar. But my kids love it. I mean, they would eat it for dessert. I got to keep it up high in the fridge so they don't go get it, which is so much easier to do than an oil or a giant pit, right? Or even, sometimes it can be hard to get kids to eat salmon or something. But I liken omega-3s to they are to brain growth what protein is to muscle growth, right? So when we're doing neurofeedback, so we're exercising the brain. I always tell them we got to make sure we're getting omega-3s because your brain's going to need that to create new connections and to myelinate the neurons and do all the things it needs to do in response to the challenge that we're giving it. We want to maximize our BDNF, which is your brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is what tells your brain to make new connections and grow. It's like BDNF is like doing strength training, right? It tells your muscles to actually grow. And so BDNF is great stuff. You need exercise and sleep, and you need to manage your stress and get outside and optimize your vitamin D. And I always like to mention, if you're taking vitamin D, always make sure you get some vitamin K2. It's important. It's kind of a newer thing not everybody's aware of. But K2 is important to take with vitamin D. In fact, we just reformulated our vitamin D to include K2 with it. And eating to reduce inflammation. All right. I will say I've seen some really amazing cases at the Amen Clinic where people came in and did a reevaluation a year later, and we looked at compared their QEEGs side by side, and there was tremendous improvement. And I asked them, I said, well, what did you do in this year? And they said, well, I just took the supplements. And I was a little surprised. Thought, okay, well, I get it. That's the easiest thing to do. But I was very impressed by what you could, the change you could make in a brain towards normal, towards better functioning with those supplements. All right. Activity, here we have the American Association of Pediatricians guidelines recommended for kids. Always good to kind of be reminded, like, wow, they really want kids to be active 60 minutes a day. They recommend vigorous aerobic activity. They recommend strength training. The body and the brain are very connected, and moving our bodies stimulates your cerebellum a great deal, and your cerebellum stimulates your whole cortex. So, movement really gets that cerebellum going, and then that gets the rest of your brain going. So movement is very powerful. And there's a great story in this book I recommend as a reference, the Spark, the new revolutionary new science of exercise by Dr. Rady, who's a renowned ADHD psychiatrist. He helped a school pilot a program where kids who are having trouble learning got a 0 period exercise class, and they used a heart rate monitor to measure. That was what their grade was based on, so their effort. So the kids who were already really fit still had to put forth a lot of effort and get their heart rate up, and the kids who weren't as fit, they got credit for progress, which was getting their heart rate up, even though they weren't as fast as other kids. And they had dramatic improvements in behavior and academic performance. So it was a great little study. If only all our schools were as on it as they were. But you can always, I think these are some funny suggestions. You can do a morning dance party, get everybody moving, turn on some music that gets you moving, and go for it for a few minutes and get the blood flowing. All right, helping kids find purpose. Purpose is very important. Of course, this could be its own presentation all by itself. So mostly I'm going to give you a book reference, How to Navigate Life by Liang and Klein. Great book on the importance of purpose and how to help kids develop a sense of purpose. I've got probably way more bullet points than I could ever get to here. But it has a huge impact on their outcomes with kids and improves their health in so many ways, and creates motivation, right? And without motivation, we're stuck. We're not going to go far. All right, so we talked about those foundations, and what if those are in place, but we're still not seeing the improvements when we're still having behavior problems or academic problems. Right, we can look at the brain, just like Dr. Frabel was talking about. We can try to take a look and say, well, what is going on in here? What insight can looking at the brain give us, so that we can figure out what the missing piece is, to help them succeed. So this is where I like to jump into my own story a little bit. I got to graduate school, and although I was successful, people were like, well, we think you could do more. And they're like, why don't you go get checked out for ADD? And I was like, okay, I'll go do that. And that helped. Like I got some help with that. But then I got trained in neurofeedback. I got trained in looking at brain maps, and I discovered that I didn't actually have ADD. What I had was sleep apnea, and I had a former head injury. So I had, mild traumatic brain injury from a car accident. And when I learned that, then I was able to intervene on the sleep, which made an immediate massive improvement in my functioning, and my ability to remember things and focus and all that. And then I got neurofeedback for my head injury, which was also a dramatic improvement. And that's where I became passionate about brain health and brain imaging and doing what we do at the Amen Clinic. Because I realized that, I was being trained to be a talk therapist in graduate school. And I was like, well, you could talk all day to someone with a brain injury, and, it's going to be really limited what you're going to accomplish unless you really address, those deeper problems. All right, so let's look a little bit at QEEG brain mapping. So with QEEG, we are looking at the electrical activity in the brain. It's non-invasive. I put a cap on the head. And I really should have that image up here, but I'm going to jump to one of my last slides so you can see what it looks like. So that's the QEEG cap. It's comfortable. It's not comfortable for everybody. Some people are more sensitive than others, but generally people say it's comfortable. Then we use a little saline gel to get the connection between the sensors and the scalp. We measure 10 minutes of your EEG eyes closed and eyes open. It will give you a bad hair day. Probably don't be expecting to go to the prom afterwards. So it's a procedure most people can do if you can sit still for 20 minutes. That's people always ask me, well, can my old child do this? I'm like, well, can they sit still for 20 minutes? That's really, and comply with putting on the cap and letting me gel it up and all that. And if they can do that, then we can do the QEEG and get some insights into what's going on. Let me jump back up. Right. It's really the same measurement as is used in neurology, gathering the electrical activity of the brain at 19 sites. But what's different about the QEEG is a neurologist would evaluate the EEG by looking at it visually, characterizing the waves. We quantify, we turn it into a bunch of measurements of different frequencies, which we can compare to a database we have of what's normal for different ages. And when we do that, that gives us a bunch of maps and Z-scores. It can tell us we've got an abnormal amount of slow waves in the frontal lobe or fast waves in the parietal lobe, and all that's super informative. So this is comparing SPECT and QEEG. SPECT is really great at getting at the whole brain, including a lot of deeper structures. Like it gets all the way down to the cerebellum, it gets the thalamus, the basal ganglia, things I wish I could see with the QEEG. The QEEG, is getting the cortical surface activity, and has some challenges because some of those deeper structures, like the basal ganglia, they don't make EEG, so I can't look at them with the EEG. But I can get lots of great information about timing in the brain, how is one area talking to another area in the brain, which is super informative. How am I doing on time? No sense.
You have like about 1 minute if you want to.
1 minute. All right.
Conclusion.
All right. Well, my internal timer was accurate then. All right. So benefits. Now, another benefit of the QEEG is so we can identify what's going on to, target interventions. One intervention that is particularly targeted with the QEEG is neurofeedback. So if I find an abnormality in the QEEG that's relevant to the symptoms, with neurofeedback, you can train that directly. And for those who've not heard of neurofeedback, perhaps neurofeedback, you put the sensors on the head, you pick up the brain activity in real time. It goes into my computer, into my software. I select what aspects of that measurement I want to train. That the software puts that brain activity in control of the screen that the child is watching. So their brain is controlling the computer screen. It's a brain-computer interface. And when you do that, the brain goes, hey, I'm controlling that on an unconscious level, because your brain has to know what you're in control of so it can get you what you want and need in life, right? We come into this world as babies, we can't control our bodies, and your brain spends years mastering everything you can do with your body, right? And with your mind. So with neurofeedback, the brain goes, oh, I'm controlling that. It wants to master that control because that's your brain's job. And it starts trying to master the task that I've given it with the neurofeedback, and doing that changes the brain over time. So it's a little bit like physical therapy for the brain with repetition. Then areas of the brain receive resources because it's like working out a muscle. And the fMRI research on neurofeedback shows that area will actually grow. It'll get larger, and the little communication highways, the white matter tracts will grow as well. So this is a little article about things that we can see with the EEG that go along with treatment non-response. So there are certain markers in the QEEG that will show up when things we expect to work don't work. And there can be a high incidence of things like epileptiform activity, for instance, in autism spectrum disorder. In this particular study, 85% of folks with ASD had epileptiform, which is seizure-like activity without full-blown seizures. And when you know that, right, then someone like Dr. Faber can treat that and get a much better response than if you don't know that. This is just an example of what some QEEG data looks like. There's some other QEEG. This is the database comparison. This person has a lot of fast waves in their frontal lobe. These are some of the kinds of findings I'll list on a report. And I'm probably out of time, but personalizing neurofeedback, some studies on learning disabilities, subtypes. All right, we'll stop there. Let me just go down to my last slide. So if you want to reach me with questions, you can do that. Thank you for your time and attention.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Gattis. Super informative. Megan and I are very familiar with QEEGs. We've had our messy hairs and everything.
Great. Well, we should talk.
Yeah. Let's see if there are any questions. Please enter them in the chat. I do see one. Dr. Gattis, my child is ADHD medicated, 13. They seem to sleep deeply once they fall asleep and don't wake up if I move them or make noise. Although they're staying asleep, they move a lot at night and can end up sideways on the bed. Is this a sign of a sleep disorder?
Well, are they sleepy during the day is again like coming back to that key symptom. If they're not sleepy during the day, then we would assume they're getting enough sleep. But with the movement, a sleep study is the way to find that out, really. I don't know how to know if that much movement is enough to disrupt their sleep without doing a sleep study. So those are my thoughts. I will put a little piece in there about sleep in general. Neurofeedback can be really quite helpful in helping you move through your sleep stages appropriately and get enough of each sleep stage. So it is good for regulating sleep.
I'll return to a previous question for Dr. Faber. At what age could someone do a QEEG?
Oh, so the criteria for the QEEG is that they can sit in a chair relatively still for 20 minutes. and that can be a challenge, but we can use various incentives. I strongly support bribery when it comes to the QEEG. We're going to go get something special afterwards. We just got to get through this and sit still and keep your eyes closed. And then, kind of worst case, sometimes I only am able to get the eyes open because young children have the hardest time complying with the eyes closed. But even just the eyes open data is useful.
Mhm. Awesome. Any other questions? Please continue. Oh, we got another one. Can patients come from outside the LA area to visit the clinic and then continue treatment via Zoom?
I can jump in with that one. So absolutely, we have clinics all over the country, and I'm gonna put my contact information out at the very end of the presentations. I'm our outreach manager, so you can always reach out to me and we can coordinate. But all of our doctors, including Dr. Faber and Dr. Gattis, do work on Zoom as well.
Perfect. Okay. What type of symptoms or conditions would make me go for a QEEG or a SPECT? What would be, I guess, the difference between the two? Why would I prefer one over the other?
I can try to answer, and Dr. Gattis can throw in too what he wants. I thought Dr. Gattis did a good job. There's pluses and minuses, but one in terms of symptoms: mood, depression, anxiety, irritability, cognition, memory, focus, processing speed, any kind of learning deficiencies, things of that nature, even social skills for that matter as well. The cues look at the electrical physiology on your cortex, which gives a lot of great detail, from my perspective. The SPECT looks at instead blood flow to the surface, so it doesn't necessarily look at the cells at a much more finer level. The SPECTs, though, can look at deeper structure. So we look at the surface with SPECTs, but we also can look deeper down with the SPECTs, right? So, Jay, Dr. Gattis, you might have some other things you want to add, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great to have both. I don't think of it as an either or, but there are certainly cases where people really can only do one or the other, right? Because of needle phobia, in the case of maybe not wanting to do the SPECT, or can't sit still for the QEEG. And with the SPECT, you can do it under sedation, right, Dr. Faber?
Yeah, you can do it under sedation.
Right.
Down
and we
once
can't
a
do
month.
that with the Q. We cannot do that with the Q. I can't sedate you. It would not be useful information. So that's but they each provide a different picture of the brain activity. And so you can get some of the same insights from each, and you can get some different insights from each. And I don't have a list of when you would do one versus the other. Do you, Dr. Faber? I mean,
No.
Usually I just think of it as usually someone needs to do one or the other, not why. But I did show that chart where there's a lot of like in autism, there's a lot of epileptiform activity, and that's something that we can see in the QEEG. Dr. Faber, can you speak to that with the SPECT? I know y'all can see seizures, right? Do y'all see that?
Well, we can see areas suggestive of abnormal electrical activity that are present, but I really think it's really helpful to have both. Dr. Gattis and I had a patient with the pseudo seizures. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about Dr. Gattis is he works with a group of other doctors, neurologists, where they sit down and have a much greater intellectual, critical thinking conversation about what's going on. Mm-hmm. Which, when you think about it, it's like in medicine, we've got our studies, but sometimes you hit sort of the limit of what we've read in the journals. And you have to kind of take a lot of bright people together and say, hey, you know what? Best of all worlds, what seems to be going on. Now, I can tell you this is really cool. This patient who's having seizures 3 to 5 per day, amongst a lot of GI issues, headaches, and a lot of inflammation, Dr. Gattis's suggestions on meds and looking at specific spindles, beta spindles, she's now having a seizure a week.
That's great.
And so if you're a parent, I mean, the parents, I mean, they went through 3 to 4 years of just not seeing anything. And now this gal's got a boyfriend who's functional, boyfriend, not like, welcome to LA, can see all sorts of people. She wasn't eating, she'd have like a cracker a day, and now she's like eating, I don't say this loudly, but she needs it. She's eating burritos and other things. And she's feeling better, and her seizures are, for the most part, going away.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any last minute thoughts or comments?
I was going to say, I do appreciate that I have a mentor who's been looking at QEEGs as long as I've been alive. So, he's looked at, 1 million or so in his lifetime. So it's a wonderful amount of wisdom to tap into, in addition to my own experience.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Faber and Dr. Gattis. There are AMIN clinics all across the country, correct? And as Sarah mentioned, she will be putting specifically Dr. Faber and Dr. Gattis's information at the end of the presentation. And then we'll, of course, be sending all of that information out in an email for everyone who signed up. But again, I totally understand if you got to hop off, you're very busy doctors, but I want to just thank you again for joining us on this webinar. The Stowell Learning Center has been following Dr. Amen, the Amen Clinic's work for a really long time. And we're just so privileged to be able to connect with you and partner together. So thank you again to the both of you. If anyone thinks of a last minute questions for either doctor, please feel free to enter them in the chat. And we'll make sure that the questions get answered, whether it's at the end of the presentation or in an email afterwards. But yes, thank you so much again. All right, so I will be wrapping up this evening's webinar with a presentation on dyslexia. So let me share my screen. I'm not the most tech savvy. Okay. All right, so we talked about ADD, ADHD, sleep challenges, anger management sort of challenges. These are all things that we're probably often seeing. Another big one that we get, at least with the Stowell Learning Center, is dyslexia. And personally, I think it's one of the most misunderstood learning challenges. There tends to be a very stereotypical image of what dyslexia is, but it's so much more. And so I'm going to be talking about what that looks like and what is actually going on in the brain and what can be done about it. So again, I mentioned at the top of the webinar, I am Irene Lee. I am the Center Director of the Stowell Learning Center in Pasadena, which is one of 4 locations in the Southern California area, including Thousand Oaks, Chino, and Irvine. And yes, Megan is joining and she'll help me field some questions. All right, so if you've done any research about the Stowell Learning Center, you have probably stumbled across this. This is our learning skills continuum. I feel like Dr. Gattis and Dr. Faber touched upon the idea of really figuring out what exactly is going on. I think we get so many stories of parents who they tried everything, but they are missing the actual root of the issue or root cause. And I think that is so important to understand in not only, looking at all the challenges that we have already talked about, but, dyslexia and behavior and anything else that could be or that's masking what actually is going on. So our learning skills continuum, we analogize learning like a continuum of skills, like a ladder. If you're trying to do a job at the top of the ladder, but some of the underlying rungs are not stable or solid, then of course your attention, energy, efforts are going to get diverted away from doing that job. So also trying to stay balanced. And we have to really pinpoint exactly what is going on, meet the individual where they're at, and then work our way up the continuum. With something like dyslexia, that could involve so many different skills on varying rungs of the ladder. So it's not as simple as diagnosing, oh, it's dyslexia, but what challenges, what core challenges are actually getting in the way of making up that specific type of dyslexia for that specific type of individual. I think many of us know or are familiar with the left brain versus the right brain. Typically, the left brain is controlling the organizational processes, kind of very rote sort of thinking. This is what where numbers or math or science, that sort of information is predominantly processed. And then we typically think of the right brain as the creative side, the artistic side, prefers to view things in images or likes 3D sort of processing, those sort of things. This is very important in understanding, I think, the dyslexic brain as a whole. We call it the dyslexic brain, like a dyslexic thinking style or that dyslexic brain. It does tend to be right brain dominant, or that is the preferred mode of thinking for these individuals. It does tend to be very image-based, prefers things in visual images, whether that's pictures, videos, things like that. And then these are where most of those sort of strengths are housed. So there are both strengths and challenges with a dyslexic brain. So thinking of that left versus the right brain, the strengths tend to be in the stereotypical right brain skills. I mentioned some of those. These individuals tend to be very creative or thrive in those fields, not only art, but acting or architecture or anything where having like a processing of 3D is the dominant skill. I had a doctor who, I forget what specific type of doctor, but he was he he did a lot of surgeries, and he was dyslexic, and he had a very optimal brain for being able to perceive what he needs to do for surgeries. Comprehension tends to be a strength because these individuals tend to gain a lot of big picture information. They grab a lot of information just from their surroundings, and they're intuitive individuals. They pick up on emotions. They're very charismatic individuals, and this all helps support that comprehension. And then dyslexic individuals down. What was that?
You froze for just a second on my end.
Oh, am I back?
Yes, you are.
Okay, perfect. I'll just mention what the last part. So dyslexic individuals tend to think in big pictures. They grab holistic information, or what's called the top-down approach. They tend to miss details, but pick up on main ideas and things like that. There are so many famous individuals with dyslexia from across the spectrum of skills, including Walt Disney, Thomas Edison, Pablo Picasso, etc. If you go into these individuals' stories, you'll hear time and time again, their experience as a child growing up in school was very not so great. Schools tend to be very left brain focused, or allow these left brain individuals to thrive more so than perhaps the right brain individuals. But then once they become adults and they're able to kind of do whatever they want, they do become CEOs or these really prominent people in their industry because these individuals are so intelligent and creative and just very unique, smart thinkers. So I think I would be remiss to not mention those strengths. Dyslexic individuals are some of the most intellectual people on this planet, and I envy the way that their brain processes. They are very, very smart visual learners. However, if the right brain is that much more strengthened, there does tend to be the challenges on that left brain. So if you think 3D processing is a strength, then 2D, which is reading, spelling, writing, is going to be disorienting, a little bit more confusing for dyslexic individuals. Anything that has to do with organizational processing or linear thinking will be a struggle, perhaps maybe keeping a schedule or thinking ahead for due dates and things like that. These individuals have a hard time reproducing their intellect onto paper. So you get so many families who say, why can my child tell all these elaborate, great stories, but they can't write it down? Because that incorporates a different process, a different sort of thinking in that left brain. Attention and memory can be a challenge because, again, these individuals are just so creative. They're in their minds and thinking about all of these things that are probably much more interesting than 2D information, which is typically what is presented in schools. Dyslexia is known to be a language-based disorder. So language is a huge skill. There could be challenges within that area, whether that's taking in language or being able to express themselves clearly, concisely, in a way that others can understand. And if their strength is in big picture thinking, then the details tend to be missed. So dyslexia, there's no one type of dyslexia. It is a spectrum of severities, and then there are so many different skills that go into making up one individual's type of dyslexia. So it's not just an inability or a deficit in reading. It is so much more than that. I mentioned it's a language-based disorder, so that could be something that that individual struggles with. Dyslexia does tend to be genetic, so it runs in the family. And the number is about 1 in 5 individuals has a form of dyslexia. So that's a lot if you think about it, you know, that we're walking around and probably someone you pass by has some kind of dyslexia. There are 7 diagnosable types of dyslexia, and these 3 components, auditory, visual, and motor, make up that type of dyslexia. So whatever the combination is, makes up that one of the 7 types of dyslexia. And so again, this is why it's so important to not only know that it's dyslexia, but what does it actually look like functionally in that individual's day-to-day life? How are they processing? Is auditory a strength, but visual and motor is a weakness? Then let's put our focus on that and not waste our time in the auditory realm, you know, that sort of thinking. And then there is something called stealth dyslexia. If you Google it, it is widely known. These individuals tend to get by, or they tend to be missed because they are so intelligent and they can mask very, very well. They spend that much more time or effort or energy than their peers in processing the same information, especially in a school type of setting or perhaps in a job or something like that. So with the understanding of neuroplasticity, a widely researched and proven thing, the brain can literally be changed. It can be strengthened and permanently corrected. So everything that Dr. Faber and Dr. Gattis mentioned, all those challenges, dyslexia, those are neural processes. They can be corrected through all of these modalities that we have been talking about, and dyslexia being one of them. So the Stowell Learning Center, dyslexia is one of our biggest populations, and we boldly say that dyslexia can be either dramatically and permanently improved or completely corrected. not to change the learning style of the individual, but whatever challenges those individuals are experiencing, those could be trained, and they don't have to live with struggling so much in the area of reading, writing, spelling while they're in their school age, their school ages. So yeah, these skills can be permanently corrected. It depends on the individual on what that's going to look like. So it could start at the very core or the bottom of that continuum where we have to go after the attention realm. If there's a lot of dysregulation, that has to be addressed first. But then within the dyslexic thinking style, it could be within the auditory, visual, or motor range, or all of the above. It really depends, and we have to either get that brain scan or do an assessment to identify exactly what that is. To bring it all back to our Lord and Savior, that learning skills continuum. It's so important to understand this. We have to, again, go back to identifying exactly the root cause, meet the individual where they're at, and then work our way up the continuum. Not every corrective approach is going to be the right one for each individual. Hence why we are giving this presentation. There are so many different things to explore and understand, especially if you've tried, many things before in the past. You might be missing an avenue that could be quite informative. So the Stowell Learning Center, we do that permanent brain training. Again, I mentioned dyslexia is one of our biggest populations. So if you're seeing some of those challenges that I mentioned, it could be dyslexia. So we do one-on-one cognitive educational brain training where we're training the memory, correcting auditory processing skills, correcting the graphomotor skills, whatever the case may be. Or perhaps you need to look into the neurofeedback, the brain training, and supplements. And maybe medication. We didn't mention that because I think we're all in the realm of trying to avoid medication as much as possible. But you know what? It is out there and it could be the right fit for certain individuals. I think all of our goals are to create comfortable, confident, independent learners without band-aid approaches. We don't want these people to work around their challenges, but to dive in, go after correcting it at the core, and send them on their way being as independent, happy, confident as possible. All right, I made the time. So with the Stowell Learning Center, we do, like I mentioned, that one-on-one brain training. We start with an assessment process to identify perhaps if it's dyslexia and what that looks like, or if it's other things. We partner with different professionals like the Amen Clinic or other sort of professionals within the field, and we would recommend the right fit for your child. So with the Stowell Learning Center, we do offer in-person and online training. Our centers are only in Southern California, but we do offer remote or Zoom sessions. We do vet if that is the right fit for your specific individual, because I'm sure we all know that Zoom is not the best fit for everybody. Some upcoming events, we have many, but if you are interested in the Stowell Learning Center, I am actually hosting a info session in 2 weeks, Monday, October 9th. And if you have any questions about the Stowell Learning Center, you're more than welcome to attend or reach out to me at my email. Thank you again, Amen Clinics, Dr. J. Faber and Dr. J. Gattis. Sarah, do you want to talk about where we can reach you all?
Irene, could I ask a couple questions that came through while you're presenting?
Yes, I'm like on a train.
No problem. Don't want to miss these questions because they're great ones.
Yes.
Had a question come in. My son has been diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 6 by his pediatrician. He is now 9, but he is really struggling with reading. He doesn't even sound out the words. He just guesses. And of course, this impacts his understanding. Could this also be dyslexia or both? And how do you sort this out in kids with dual diagnoses?
It definitely could be dyslexia. Again, if you kind of think of the dyslexic brain, it's creative, it's thinking about all of these fun things, and that could look like attention deficits. in our assessment, we would be able to better tell if it's one or the other or both. Dyslexia is the one thing that we officially diagnose, but with the Stowell Learning Center, it kind of doesn't matter what it is. We're going to train all of those skills. So if it's one or the other or both, we're going to train attention. We're going to train whatever skill is, getting in the way of a dyslexic sort of processing. But yeah, definitely could be both.
Thank you. And another question that came in is, my child also has profound performance anxiety, especially with anything timed or when he has to read out loud. How do you address this at your center?
Yeah, so again, that could be stemming from several things. That could be a processing skill, like maybe they can't process that fast, and being forced to gives them anxiety. Or it could be the format in which they are forced to process, whether that's in 2D information or maybe even visual information that's not the most comfortable for that individual. And again, being forced to process in that way in a timed manner could be anxiety inducing. We would be able to figure out exactly what that is in our assessment process.
And another one that just came in, it said, math facts are really hard. Is there a such thing as dyslexia for math? He cannot remember his times tables to save his life.
Yes, there is a math dyslexia called dyscalculia, which is basically a difficulty or inability to process number and number senses. Sometimes it could be dyscalculia, or it could just be the way in which they're processing math information. If you're doing math with a dyslexic brain on a blank sheet of paper, they're not processing organization or columns or things like that. So a very common suggestion we make is do math on graph paper so that they can see the lines and things like that. But yes, in either case, there's a dyslexia for math, and then going after correcting those visual processes.
Great. And just one more quick one, which I know you mentioned the different types of dyslexia. Somebody's asking, I thought it was just B's and D's being switched. So, do you want to just highlight a little bit more as far as what that might look like outside of that one?
Definitely. So B's and D's are the same thing. They're just flipped, right? So if you think about an individual like that, it has a strength in perceiving things in 3D. They're looking at a B and a D, and they're trying to make sense of it in a 3D form. You can't do that with 2D information. So it is honestly the same thing. So usually any sort of paper, pencil, again, 2D information is going to be what's called disorienting. I've heard it described in many different ways, where some have said that the letters feel like they're moving on the page, they're pulsating, it feels nauseating to look at a piece of paper. I've had one little kiddo say that the words were falling off of the page. I remember someone mentioned that the punctuation on a piece of paper felt like little gnats, and it was really annoying and just kind of getting in their way of processing. So if you think anytime they have to read anything, it's going to feel like that, that's going to be uncomfortable. And then you have to force yourself to really tune in and pay attention and make that all come together. You're not going to be able to, process that way for a long period of time without getting utterly exhausted.
All right. Well, thank you. That was great information. Those are all the questions for tonight. So thank you for those of you that are watching live.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Sarah, where can we find you all?
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. It's kind of hard to see where you present, but anyway, you can see my information. So I'm Sarah. I'm our clinic outreach manager for the Amen clinics. So I'm able to help answer any questions that you have, whether that's about a location, what the process looks like, pricing, really any questions that you have, you can direct to me. And if you have any questions for either Dr. Faber or Dr. Gattis, Dr. Gattis did give his contact information, but you can always send them to me as well, and I'm happy to filter them through to both of them. There is our Encino address on Balboa Boulevard. We do have a clinic there. But we do have a clinic in Orange County as well for all you California listeners. And then we also do have one in Northern California. And then the rest of our clinics are sprinkled through, through the East Coast. We have some clinics that are more central. So we're very spread out. And, again, if you did hear Dr. Faber or Dr. Gattis, say anything that kind of struck a chord with you, or you're interested in having your kid or, a patient come through for a scan or a QEEG, go ahead and reach out to me either through my cell phone or my email, and I'm happy to help set that up and answer any questions along the way. So thanks everyone for listening, and thanks again to Dr. Gattis and Dr. Faber.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dr. Gattis and Dr. Faber. Thank you all for joining this evening. We are so grateful for your time. We hope you found some information that you can take away and take some action with. And like Sarah mentioned, all of our information will be provided to you in an email after this presentation, along with the recording in case you missed any pieces of information. Continue to send your questions, and I think that's it. Thanks again. Have a good evening. It's evening for you.
Thanks for having me. Have a good night.
Thank you.